We are recording this program. Welcome, my name is Ava Ayers. I'm the director of the Government Law Center and a faculty member at Albany Law School. And I'm very happy to welcome you to the second in our series of Warren Anderson legislative seminars. I'm going to say just a few words before I turn it over to Richard Rifkin, the legal director of the Government Law Center, who's going to be moderating today's event. First, I want to say the sponsors of today's event are multiple and wonderful. We have our series sponsors, the Rafay Group PC, also a donation in memory of Sharon P. O'Connor of the Albany Law School class of 1979, and Brown and Weinraub PLLC. And we're grateful to all of them for sponsoring the entire series of programs. We also have program sponsors for today's event, Greenberg Traurig and Harris Beach, and we're very grateful to both of them. And so I also wanted to thank some of the fabulous members of the Government Law Center's advisory board, who I believe are with us, including Mark Glazer, Josh Oppenheimer, Andy Rafay, who's a sponsor, and George Weissman, as well as Bob Batson, Tracy Brooks, BJ Costello, Mike Fallon, Mark, I've already mentioned, Darren Rylowitz. Thank you all for being here. The most important person for all of you all to know about is Lisa Rivage. She is our CLE coordinator at the Government Law Center. And if you wish to receive the free CLE credit that our sponsors are making possible for you, please make sure to get your CLE forms to Lisa. You should have received information along with your registration about how to do that. So today, I'm going to turn it over to Richard, but just say a few words about this panel. We're going to be talking, as no doubt you all know, about the future of sports wagering in New York. We now have 4 casinos authorized in upstate New York who've been granted the exclusive right to conduct sports betting. Thus far, the on-site sports wagering business of the casinos has been limited, and there are currently several different proposals on how to authorize mobile sports wagering. We're going to look at that today. Our third and fourth programs of the year coming up will deal with reforming the electoral process and the future of the courts in a post-COVID era. So I encourage everybody to watch out for those, get on our email list if you're not already. Today on the panel, we have, I'm very happy to welcome Shanna Cassidy, who's the committee director of the Racing, Gaming, and Wagering Committee at the New York State Senate. She's also senior legislative assistant to Senator Joe Addabbo, serving as the senator's principal advisor on all issues before the committee and acting as the committee's liaison to central staff and the New York State Gaming Commission. Bennett Liebman, my colleague and friend, is a government lawyer in residence here at the Government Law Center, and he's done a great deal of work putting this panel together, for which we're very grateful. Bennett has been at various times acting director of the Government Law Center, executive director, and interim director, which is really collecting just about all the titles anybody could want. He's also been counsel to Mario Cuomo when he was lieutenant governor, special deputy counsel to Governor Mario Cuomo, and deputy secretary for gaming and racing to Governor Andrew Cuomo. He was also a member of the State Racing and Wagering Board for more than 10 years and its acting co-chair from 1996 to 97. Stacey Rowland became counsel to Rivers Casino and Resort in January 2017. She provides leadership, guidance, and advisory support while representing the casino and resort on a multitude of issues, including contractual matters, employment and labor issues, insurance and regulatory and compliance issues. She previously served as a member of the government relations practice at Bryant Rubino and served the state as deputy superintendent for intergovernmental and legislative affairs for the Department of Insurance, assistant counsel to the comptroller, and assistant counsel to the Senate Finance Committee. And finally, Daniel Wallach is the founder of Wallach Legal LLC, a law firm devoted exclusively to the burgeoning field of sports wagering and gaming law in the US. Known as the sports betting attorney, he has counseled professional sports teams, sports betting operators, fantasy sports companies, sports integrity firms, casinos, racetracks, and service providers in navigating the complexities of US gambling laws and regulations. He's the co-founding director of the University of New Hampshire School of Law's Sports Wagering and Integrity Program, the nation's first law school certificate program dedicated to the study of sports wagering and integrity. He began his legal career as a judicial law clerk for the Honorable Jacob Mishler in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of New York. So for any of your friends or colleagues who may want to catch this program later, we will be posting video up on the GLC's website not long after the event. Fortunately, we all get to be here live, and I will now turn it over to Richard. Oh, but I forgot to mention, I will be watching the chat, and if there are time for questions at the end, we will try to give the panel time to answer them. Feel free to put questions into the chat. I'll be watching that, and I'll be ready to share them with the panel at the end if there's time. So with that, Richard, over to you.
Well, thank you, Ava. And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second Anderson program of the year on the future of sports wagering in New York. And Ava has told you about the panel. I think we've got a superb panel here. They'll be presenting different views, and that's really the critical issue at this point in New York. I think, as most of you know, one of the priority topics that's now being discussed within the budget discussions in Albany is sports wagering. Most people seem to be in agreement that we should adopt sports wagering. Certainly other states have been doing that since the Supreme Court permitted states to do it. New Jersey is well on its way. Connecticut decided to adopt it last week. And so the concept is that this is important for New York, if for no other reason, of course, that it's a revenue raiser. Now, having talked about the agreement, as I think we'll hear this afternoon, there is a good deal of disagreement and discussion at this point as to exactly how it should be structured. What will be the role of the casinos? What about the Indian tribes? Do they even need the state's permission? As I said, there will be revenues. How will those revenues be allocated? All of these are very much open questions, and I think we'll hear a good deal about them as the discussions continue in Albany. With that, let me turn it over to the speakers, by the way, in order, will be Bennett, Liebman. All of them have been introduced to you. Stacey, Rowland, Daniel Wallach, and then wrapping it up will be Shanna, Cassidy. So with that introduction, let me turn it over to Bennett, and let's get the program started.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Ava, for the kind introductions. I'll be here just to describe the New York State gambling laws, sports gambling in America, and the current issues facing New York sports gambling. My role is like that of a starting pitcher in current Major League Baseball. I'll throw a couple of innings and let the people in the trenches take over. That's probably a good idea since, as Will Rogers might have said, all I know is what I read on Twitter. The first thing you need to understand about New York gambling is that it's supposed to be totally illegal, with 5 exceptions. The last was a maximum of 7 private casinos in 2013. Nothing in particular was mentioned on sports gambling. It could come in only under the casino gambling exception. Sports betting starts basically in the 19th century with boxing. It progresses early in the 20th century with team sports when horse racing became unlawful in many states. It surges in the 1940s due to the ingenious invention of point spreads. It's hard to believe that the line used to come out of Minneapolis for 2 decades before the action moved to Nevada. And Nevada doesn't become significant until the federal tax on gambling is reduced significantly in the 1970s. Meanwhile, there are some efforts to legalize sports gambling in New York. New York City OTB floated a plan to buy Madison Square Garden and turn it into a betting center. Governor Mario Cuomo in late 1983 proposed legalizing wagering on football parlay cards through OTBs. Attorney General Robert Abrams shot it down as an illegal lottery. Undaunted, however, the governor back in 1991 brought back the proposal, and it looked like it was going to pass, but at the last minute, Senate Majority Leader Ralph Moreno backed out. Now, this flurry of action in New York and in some other states led the major sports leagues and the NCAA to get Congress to pass PASPA, the Professional and Amateur Sports Authorization Act. It's Sports Protection Act, I'm sorry, in 1992, which banned sports gambling except in those states where it was currently legal. Just think of it as largely granting a sports betting monopoly to Nevada. And by the time of New York's 2013 casino legislation, New Jersey had been battling with the leagues and the federal government over sports betting. We in New York did not want to give Jersey a huge advantage, so we allowed for sports gambling under the rubric of casino gambling and basically copied New Jersey's 2012 legislation. New York sports wagering would only commence if a court found PASPA unconstitutional or the legislation was changed. Now, I'm responsible for adding sports gambling to the casino bill. I taught gambling law here at Albany Law for many years, and I was reminded of New Jersey's failed opportunity in 1993 to include sports gambling as part of its casino wagering authorization. I did not want to lose this opportunity. So Rob Williams, who is now the executive director at the Gaming Commission, and I put sports gambling in the bill. We were amazed that nobody paid any attention to it. And I never would have believed we were headed down the road to mobile gambling. But we found out that no good deed goes unpunished. The Supreme Court in 2018 found PASPA unconstitutional. So we did have sports gambling in New York, but we had a system that allowed only sports betting at 4 land-based private casinos upstate in a world moving to mobile sports gambling. Now, how does sports gambling work now? We're simply not in Minneapolis anymore. It's not pari-mutuel. It's the casinos against the bettor. The casinos can lose. So when the Patriots won the Super Bowl in 2019, the casino in nearby Rhode Island took a bath. There are a variety of bets. We see point spreads, over, under, money lines, wager propositions, in-game, parlays. The casinos in Nevada have been winning with about a hold of 6% over the last 3 years. The hold for New Jersey was 6.6% in 2020, and it's somewhat higher in other states. What do people bet? Football is still the leader, especially in Nevada, followed by basketball, baseball, and hockey trailing the field. So what's happened? In the last 34 months, since the Supreme Court decision, 25 states have legalized sports gambling with a strong likelihood that we'll see legalization in maybe 10 more states this calendar year. And now the betting numbers are quite large. These are the wins per state. $1.5 billion win nationwide for 2020, a revenue increase of 69%, 400 million, that 27% of that number comes from New Jersey, 270 million in Pennsylvania, all in a year with 4 months of no sports. New York set its own record of $10.8 billion. So we now have 3% of New Jersey's revenue. And the point here is that the market is simply in mobile gambling. In the mobile states, we're seeing 90% of wagering online and not in retail stores. And we were approaching this level even before COVID. It's 87% for mobile wagering in the first months of 2020. in New Jersey. Now it's 95% mobile in Illinois. January of 21, it was 92.5% in New Jersey. This makes you wonder if entities getting only bricks and mortar sports betting are buying a pig and a poke. So who do you bet with? What are the mobile brands? They're known as skins. New Jersey allows 3 skins per property. Pennsylvania has 1 per property. The main legislative bill in New York, the Addabbo Pretlow bill, has 2 skins per property. Now you can see. Now who do you bet with? FanDuel. FanDuel has the market. FanDuel and it's hard to explain how much it is here. It's just amazing how much FanDuel and DraftKings have this market. FanDuel has 56% of the New Jersey market right now, 40% in the entire United States, more than the top 2 and 3 skins per combined. DraftKings is the number 2 skin. They're in the most states, 12 of them. Their 2020 revenue was way up, but their losses were $850 million in 2020. After that, everybody wants a share of the action. You have casino corps, media corps, lottery firms, foreign firms, even horse racing firms. And there are lots of permutations. Barstool Sports, the millennial male sports and culture blog, has combined with Penn National, and it's made real inroads where it operates. It has signed a deal with Rivers Casino to be an online book. MGM has been aggressive in the last few months. They're now in 3rd place nationally. The interplay of these companies is hard to follow. For example, the Stars Group, which is the skin for the St. Regis Mohawk Casino, is part of Flutter, which controls FanDuel and Fox Bet. You cannot tell the skins without a program. And what tax revenue are they bringing in? Well, the chart sort of gives you something if you look at the far right. The state revenue per capita. And the fact is that generally the higher the tax rate, the greater the tax revenue per capita. We see the high tax states of Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Delaware, and the District of Columbia leading the way. New Jersey, with a huge volume, provides some revenue, but is still well below the high tax states. So if your one concern is legalizing sports gambling, if it's tax revenue, you might move to a highest tax rate. So that kind of basically means we have 3 kinds of models for mobile sports gambling. 1, low tax, low entry, many skins. Think of New Jersey and Michigan. There's more competition, more incentives for players, better payments to sports teams for sponsorships, more media ad revenue. It's a better system for the players. January in Michigan, the operators won $13.3 million, but Michigan casinos paid $18 million in promos to players. They lost nearly $5 million because of their incentives. In these states, players do better. There's a middle ground, higher taxes, but several skins. Pennsylvania has a 36% tax on net revenue, better state revenue, some competition. Then finally, there's the lottery monopoly styles states, New Hampshire, Rhode Island. Less promos for bettors, more state revenue, little competition. So that leaves New York, and I'll try to keep it somewhat quick here. Here's the governor's proposal. It's intentionally sketchy, but mobile betting is going to go to 1 or more casino-approved skins after a competitive bidding process. It's modeled like New Hampshire, high tax, monopoly, or oligopoly. No added retail shops or betting at sports venues. It's estimated at $500 million to the state. And you could arguably get to this number by saying that New Jersey has sports gambling win of 400 million, and they have 45% of the same population as New York, and maybe we'd reach $1 billion in revenue that way. And that's also what Spectrum Gaming, which just completed a study of New York's gaming industry, said, basically thinking a possibility of a $1 billion market for New York sports wagering. However, when you look at revenue per capita, the highest revenue per capita states provide almost only about $10 per capita. Under that, I'd say more realistic scenario, you might expect $200 million in tax revenue. Now for the Addabbo Pretlow bill, it's far more comprehensive. I unfortunately, perhaps far too cynically would say, it's no lobbyist has left behind in this bill. I mean, it gives everybody a little bit of what they want. It's mobile wagering based on the side of the server. There are 2 skins per casino, $12 million upfront fees per skin, a mobile tax of 12%. Tribes can opt in for mobile wagering at the same tax rate as the casinos. OTBs and racinos and larger sports venues can serve as affiliates of casinos, allowing de facto retail wagering through kiosks. Estimated state revenue of $79 million plus one-time $84 million upfront. Finally, some concerns. 25 of the 33 largest lobbyists in New York State have had clients involved with casinos and sports gambling. It has been full employment for lobbyists. I think the major problem is the tribes. It's an exceptionally important issue. Can the tribes do mobile sports wagering without authorization? What becomes of exclusivity? There's $166 million in exclusivity payments slotted in out years for the budget from the tribes. The Seneca Nation is not paying as is. The Oneidas have clear exclusivity under that compact. If you take a mobile bet from someone in Oneida County, does that mean the state loses $50 million from the Oneida Nation? Service situs. Someone's likely to sue over the use of the situs as the location of the wager. Do we use the site of the server to determine the location of other commercial transactions? Sales tax, insurance tax, stock transfer tax, banking. How about the many towns that forbid games of chance? Can I now buy raffles over the internet if the server's in a town that allows games of chance? I'm glad to have given you this Cook's tour, but the fact is that New York sports betting is not really susceptible of any kind of quick look. We'll be back arguing about everything I've tried to cover for many, many years to come. Thank you.
Okay, well, I will say at least one thing we're not arguing about anymore is whether or not the constitutional amendment permits online wagering. We all seem to be at the same point where it's understood that the amendment did include online wagering when it authorized the legislature's authority to permit gambling. There are 2 conditions: that it must constitute casino gambling, and that the casino gambling can only occur at one of the facilities authorized by the legislature, which we are. I would say that whether you take the governor's proposal or you take the legislature's approach, there needs to be the involvement and a role for commercial casinos. Now we have as Bennett said, the governor's proposal is vague, and we'll have to wait and see when and if there's an RFP to see what it details. But it would be wise for all commercial casinos to be allowed to offer online wagering. Our sports wagers, the demographic of them, they come into our facility. They wager. But pre-COVID, you could actually sit, watch a game. You could eat. They also go to the table games and play a slot machine. They use the facilities. If you were to exclude our casino as one that can offer wagering, we would lose that base. So we're going to lose the on-site revenue. So we should be able to pick it up in the online space. The decrease that then leads to an increase in gross gaming revenue. If you have one operator, you're going to slow down the foot traffic in the bricks and mortar casinos. And that does affect our team members. We are still in the midst of a terrible pandemic. We are trying to become, we're trying to grow and get our, excuse me, I was thinking of something else. We are trying to become the economic engine that we have been. The pandemic has affected our team members professionally. We still have over 200 on furlough. It has affected our team members personally. They've experienced the devastation that COVID has created in their families and their personal lives. We are trying to rebuild, provide a place where a team can continue to grow. Anyone that has been in the area of Schenectady pre-Rivers and post will see that it's a big change, that we have created businesses, provided areas for businesses to bloom. We have had a great support of the community to be here. We also have 300 vendors that supply goods and services to us. 50% are New York and about 25% of them are small businesses. They have also been affected by the pandemic. So we do not think that it would be fair to create a model that would exclude any of the commercial casinos. You can tell by Bennett, thank you for putting sports wagering in the law. So there was an acknowledgement that it was included and that it should be included. And if the legislation is going to change, believe right now it says that you have to actually come into a sports wagering lounge to place the bet. If you expand that or remove it, which means that people can actually do it online, anyone that's authorized under Article 13 of the Racing and Wagering Law should be able to offer online wagering. I think that's my points for now. I'll have more as people are discussing it, but we look forward to seeing a proposal that includes the commercial casinos. And we're thrilled that we're actually at a point where we're talking about this, because Dan, I believe the last time you and I were on a panel together, we were talking about the constitutionality of it. Well, we're over that. And so here we are now.
Thankfully, we are.
Thank you, Stacey. Let's move on now as we get a different perspective from Daniel Wallach. Daniel?
Yeah, thank you very much, Richard. Thank you, everyone, for joining this video webinar. I'll encourage questions. So if you want to submit them, during my presentation, I'll handle them on the fly. I can multitask, so I want to make this as interactive as possible. I do want to pose a quick question for Bennett. In 2021, as we sit here today, if you could go back in a time machine to 2013, would you have written the New York sports wagering chapter a little bit differently to include mobile wagering? Of course, it would have obviated the need for today's panel. But do you have any post-enactment regret over that? Hate to put you on the spot.
The answer is obviously yes, because but in 2012, 2013, nobody was talking about the possibility of this. I mean, we were lucky enough to guess at the possibility that sports gambling would eventually be legalized, but we were not that clairvoyant to see mobile sports gambling in the future.
Okay, well, I hope I didn't jeopardize any future invites to the Saratoga conferences that you always organize. Okay, with that out of the way, I mean, think of how far we've come in 1 year. A year ago, so much of the debate around mobile sports wagering was centered on the constitutional question. There was a school of thought that adding a mobile component to the existing sports wagering law would require a separate ballot measure, AKA a constitutional amendment. And I testified on that issue in Albany in May 2019. And it was my position then, and it's my position now, that there is no constitutional obstacle to the addition of a mobile component for several reasons. The most important of which is that the New York State Constitution intentionally leaves the gambling terminology undefined, such as what constitutes casino gambling, what constitutes a lottery or parimutuel betting on horse races, and embedded or explicitly written into the constitutional exceptions for all of those categories are the magic words as authorized and prescribed by the legislature, meaning that it's up to the state legislature to determine the parameters of what constitutes casino gambling. And if the state legislature wants to include, roulette, blackjack, sports wagering, any menu or suite of gaming activities, that is within their discretion. And New York court cases have recognized this principle known as the contemporaneous legislation rule, where if the legislature, which is the body that proposed the ballot measure, enters or enacts legislation somewhat contemporaneously with its proposed ballot measure, the courts generally, or not generally, but the rule of thumb is to give the legislature deference in situations like that. Now, by contrast, the lottery that was enacted in the mid-1960s presupposed a model that was based on games of pure chance. So when Governor Mario Cuomo 20 years later sought to introduce a sports wagering game under the auspices of the state lottery, it ran into some constitutional issues in the opinion of Attorney General Robert Abrams, because the enabling legislation accompanying the lottery constitutional measure had no provision for skill-based gaming activities. Now, casino gambling is a different animal altogether, because so many casino games involve a mixture of chance and skill. I mean, if you play card games, blackjack, any kind of card game, poker, while there's certainly an element of chance or luck in almost every gaming activity that one can play in a casino, I think the term or the concept of casino gambling envisions much more of a mixture of skill and chance games. So I think sports wagering fits neatly into that terminology, unlike how the lottery was first considered in New York State in the mid-1960s. So in 1 year, we've come a long way, and I think while there's so much indigestion and heat over what kind of sports wagering framework we're going to have, I think we're in a much better position than we were in 2019 and 2020, when we were trying to climb over this perceived constitutional obstacle, which thankfully does not exist anymore. And now we can move to the business of deciding legislatively what type of proposal makes the most sense for the people of New York State. And I want to build on one concept that Bennett raised earlier, which is the notion that under the state constitution, sports wagering has to run through the casinos. It's a matter of the New York State Constitution, and the reason why we have retail sports betting at the upstate casinos is that it's a subset of casino gambling at no more than 7 facilities, and that's the constitutional language. So while Massachusetts and other states might be able to place all of the stakeholders on equal footing and maybe have bars and restaurants, Class B license holders, professional sports venues, horse race tracks being on equal footing with the casinos, in New York State, because of the way the Constitution is written, it all has to be subordinated to the 4 upstate casinos and the, I believe, 3 tribal casinos. And what Senator Addabbo and Assemblyman Pretlow have carefully constructed here with their legislation is a rarity in state sports betting bills. It is 2-3 years in the making, and it is one of the rare pieces of proposed legislation that carries stakeholder consent. And the legislative graveyard is filled with a myriad of sports betting bills that have failed because the stakeholders aren't on board with the legislation. And one can only look to my home state of Florida as Exhibit A. In California, the tribes, the card rooms, and the horse race tracks don't see eye to eye. So in many of these states, the legislatures are hamstrung by stakeholder disagreements. We don't have that issue in New York State, which is, kind of miraculous when you think about it, because with everything running through the casinos, it really places the horse race tracks, the OTBs, and all the other stakeholders, video lottery terminal facilities, in a subordinated position to the casino industry, meaning you're going to need a deal with one of the upstate casinos in order to be able to have kiosks at the racetracks or the OTBs or at Madison Square Garden. These two measures that have been introduced, identical measures introduced by Senator Addabbo and Assemblyman Pretlow, have already been sort of signed off on, I believe, by the major industry stakeholders, which are obviously the casino industry, the Native American tribes, which is a major, major accomplishment, because for the tribes to be able to operate mobile wagering is a very tricky thing, given the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act requirements. And there's a body of law out there, Ninth Circuit, U.S. Court of Appeals, and some federal regulatory opinions, which call into question the ability of the tribes to be able to operate sports betting. And what Senator Addabbo and Assemblyman Pretlow have pulled off here was to create a structure that would obviate the need, or potentially obviate the need, for federal approval, and give the tribes an immediate pathway to offering mobile sports wagering. But of course, to the extent that there's any aspect of servers being located on Indian lands, that could still be technically considered gaming on Indian land. So I don't know that we've completely resolved the issue of the need to have approval of the Secretary of the Interior, the federal government. But I think what Senator Addabbo and Assemblyman Pretlow have accomplished here is placing the tribes on equal footing, not just on the substance, but the timing of the rollout of sports betting, which is a very important deal. And it gives the tribes, I think, the ability to opt out and not participate. So it doesn't force the tribal casinos into any situations that they don't wish to have. And it places the onus on the casinos, the commercial casinos, to house, to sort of site the servers at the commercial casinos at no cost to the Indian tribes in order to make this system work. So I want to get to the issue of the location of the servers. Bennett suggested that maybe somebody could challenge that as, maybe contrary to, state law, or contrary to the Constitution. I have to, the way I look at wagering and betting is I view a wager or a bet as tantamount to a contract. There's an offer, there's an acceptance, and a contract is deemed to be made at the time of acceptance. So if you analogize a wager to just a contract, the wager is deemed accepted at the place and at the time that it's processed through a computer server. And when you look at a wager and analogize it to a contract, it begins to make a little bit more sense legally. And that's exactly how mobile wagering works in Rhode Island, Michigan, and New Jersey, most of all. Those are 3 states that have constitutional limitations on where casino gambling and where sports betting can take place. And the way that those states were able to authorize mobile wagering was by mandating that the server location was the place where the bet took place, regardless of where the bet was initiated. And without that concept, without that rule of law, you don't have mobile wagering. You don't have iGaming in New Jersey. New Jersey's entire iGaming infrastructure is built on the legal principle that the location of the server is where the bet takes place. And that is a very important legal principle because New Jersey's Constitution mandates that casino gambling can only take place in Atlantic City. And when New Jersey authorized iGaming in 2013, they didn't go back and amend the Constitution one more time to broaden the region where mobile bets can be taken. The state legislature authorized mobile betting as a pure statutory enactment by including language mandating that the server be located in Atlantic City and that the wager is deemed to take place at the location of the server. So that's a very important legal principle that has been at the sort of the core of how mobile wagering works in all of these states. And New York should be no exception. If you look at how horse race betting has evolved in the state of New York, it was originally enacted under the state constitution in 1939. And back in 1939, the only place where you were allowed to make a bet was at the racetrack oval. Well, over the course of time, the legislature added new components to how you can bet on horse racing. It added telephone betting, advanced deposit wagering, off-track betting, telephone betting, and then internet-based betting on horse racing. And all of those additions were accomplished by the state legislature without having to go back and amend the New York State Constitution. So I think that's an important principle to recognize constitutionally. I also want to talk about competitive bidding and Governor Cuomo's idea of putting sports betting out to bid, a la the state of New Hampshire or the state of Rhode Island. The comparison in that instance is a state like New York, which has a population of close to 20 million people, and the only states that have done competitive bidding for sports wagering licenses, whether it be retail or mobile, are very small states such as New Hampshire, a population of 1.36 million, Rhode Island, population of 1 million. Those states have roughly 5% of New York's overall population. And to look at New Hampshire as a model for New York just doesn't make sense given the landmass and the population size of New York and New York's mix of gaming stakeholders, of racetracks, casinos, video lottery terminal operators, OTBs that now could get to participate in Senator Addabbo's and Assemblyman Pretlow's plan, that New York's complicated gaming landscape requires sort of an inclusive solution rather than exclusivity, which would unwind all of the work that Senator Addabbo and Assemblyman Pretlow have put into it over the past 2-3 years, in which they've gone to the trouble of securing the acquiescence and consent of all the involved parties. Think about how difficult that is. And it places New York in a very rare situation relative to so many of the other states that have seen their bills fail because the stakeholders weren't in alliance and the state legislature didn't have all their ducks in a row before the legislative session. This legislative body does, and it's 2-3 years in the making. So this is a layup for New York State if the governor and the executive branch can maybe find a way to adopt or utilize significant portions of the 2 legislative bills that are in existence. Now, I want to hit a couple of the questions that have been asked. Someone asked about what is a mobile skin. I think most of the people in this audience know what that means. But a mobile skin or a skin is simply an online brand. So if you're Rivers Casino and the state legislation gives you 2 skins, that means you can operate 2 individually branded websites, maybe Rush Street Interactive and maybe FanDuel or DraftKings. So each casino under the existing legislative proposal would be able to have up to 2 online mobile partners, which would mean that under the existing legislative framework, we're talking about 14 operators for mobile sports wagering. The competitive bidding proposal, by contrast, contemplates as few as 1 operator. And let me add one more element to the issue of competitive bidding. I think it does create additional time to execute, because if you're talking about competitive bidding, when you pass the law and it's signed off on by Governor Cuomo, we're not going to be ready to start mobile sports wagering right away. There are two critical steps that still have to take place. The New York State Gaming Commission would have to actually write an RFP. And, you know, looking at New Hampshire by comparison, that took about 2 months to draft. And then there's a bidding process, there are interviews, a selection process, contract negotiations. The time frame to go from the passage of a law to the taking of the first mobile wager could be as long as 6 months in New York when you take into account the procedural requirements associated with the RFP process. Moreover, you have 14 prospective interested bidders. When you think about 7 casinos times 2 skins, you're looking at applications or responses to RFPs from maybe as many as 14 different companies. And if you only pick 1 or only pick 2 or 3, that's going to create a lot of disgruntled would-be bidders, and it could lead to a bid protest. And a bid protest means more litigation. A bid protest doesn't necessarily stop the implementation of mobile wagering, but it does create an additional complication that would be entirely avoided if you were to go with the straight licensing route of, two mobile brands times 7 casinos. And what an RFP will not do is create the licensing fee structure that 14 mobile operators in the aggregate can put together. If you're going to have mobile licensing fees of 7 figures or 8 figures, you multiply that times 14. That's probably, I'm trying to do the math in my head, that's probably close to $200 million in year 1 licensing fees that you would not get in competitive bidding where only 1 company or potentially 2 companies would be selected. So I think the rollout of mobile wagering in competitive bidding would be delayed by 6 months and would forfeit the licensing fee structure that the legislative proposal provides. I don't know if I've gone over my time. I certainly have more issues that I can hit here, but I think that's the essence of my presentation.
Let us have Shanna have a chance to make a presentation. If there's time, we'll get to
sorry about that.
talk about. Although
I
we are
apologize, Shanna.
starting to run short.
And let me, Shanna,
So-
sorry, for 1 second before you start, RENO, like Reno, is the code that needs to be entered into CLE forms. So please enter Reno. I'll put that in the chat as well for everyone. Thanks so much. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. So Shanna, can you tell us something about what's going on now with all of the discussions now that we've heard about a good number of the issues?
Well, I'm not going to speak on behalf of the conference or Senator Addabbo, but I will say first, Bennett, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. This is not a lobbyist bill. This is a global, complex bill. We have talked to, for the past 3 years, we've talked to different, industry people. Jim Maney from the Counsel of Problem Gambling. He helped us get safeguards in our bill. I think we're the only bill that might have a 5% tax revenue dedicated to problem gambling. So I will say it's not a lobbyist bill, but right now, our bill, we give a lot of details, and with the governor's proposal, it's a lot of to be determined. We're not really sure, we're unsure. Is there license fees? We have license fees for the 12 skins, for the casinos and the Native American, which is, $168 million that's upfront. We know our tax structure. It's 8.5% for retail, 12% for mobile. We have educational funding, which is 68% of that goes to elementary and secondary education. We have some prohibitions. You can't bet on, sporting events for high school or collegiate colleges, when that takes place. Does the governor have that? That's a big issue in our state. We have integrity monitoring. It provides assist and investigates unusual betting activity and suspicious betting. A 0.2% in royalty fees for the leagues. I don't think the governor has that as well. A big issue that everyone has said is the tribes. I think that's going to be a big issue in our negotiations. With the governor's proposal, I don't think you can bet anything from the west of Utica, because you're in the tribal compact exclusivity zone. With our bill, with Senator Addabbo's bill, you can opt in. The Native Americans can opt in, and they are no longer subject to the requirements of the compact. They'll have to pay our tax fees. But if not, then we'll just geofence them out. And I think, Senator and Assemblyman Pretlow have talked to the tribes, and they've really worked together with them in this bill, which is very important because obviously everyone knows their situation with the state. We include the affiliates, which I don't think the governor's, it's to be determined if the governor's proposal has that. We're helping the OTBs, the racinos, the VLTs, the stadiums. It's not all at once, but it is like through a 20-month period of, they're coming in gradually. Let's see what else. Yeah, I think, it's a lot of the unknown with the governor's office. There's not a lot of details. We've asked for details, we've asked for meetings and, giving us stuff. But I think in the end of March, it's going to be, down to the last minute, as Bennett probably knows. It's the last day of the budget. It's going to happen at 3 a.m. and they're going to look for revenue. And, the senator and the staff are going to have to be ready for that. But I definitely think that with our bill, it really helps the casinos and the workers that work there. We are, there's 5,000, I think roughly around 5,000 that were unemployed a year and a half. That's real people, that's New Yorkers that have families. And just because, the governor comes up with this number does not mean that, we can't get more revenue for the state. We're helping New Yorkers, we're helping them get jobs. And, I just think some people forget about that, so that's my spiel.
Okay. We have a couple of questions, so why don't we get to those? And Daniel, I know you have some issues you'd like to talk about if we can get them in the question period.
All right, well, Richard, shall I just share the questions we've gotten in chat so far? We've gotten some more, and Daniel addressed a couple of them, but I want to make sure the other panelists also have a chance to speak to those. So,
well, we'll give all the panelists a chance who want to check on these. But I know Daniel's got some issues.
All right, great. Well, so here's what we've heard so far. One question is there more to be said on the high tax monopoly states, meaning New Hampshire and Rhode Island, that have higher per capita revenue due to the fact that they're surrounded by states that do not have legal wagering. Thus, they are artificially high due to drawing customers from surrounding states. I'm just going to read, there are 4 questions. I figure it's best if I just read them all and then the panelists can sort of decide what they want to speak to, if that makes sense. Second question was, please speak to the constitutionality of the lottery running non-lottery gambling as envisioned by the governor's proposal. This third question is, could mobile sports betting encourage gambling cruises to nowhere out of New York ports? If the answer is yes, how could those sports books be regulated to comply with the Wire Act when an out-of-state bettor places a futures bet in international waters and is then owed winnings when they're back in their home state where sports betting remains illegal? That seems to add new layers of legal mess to the server question. And finally, in light of the scandals that have marked the Cuomo administration in recent weeks, what's the likelihood that the passage of a fiscal year budget will be delayed if legislative leaders use it as a mechanism for applying pressure on Governor Cuomo to resign? Will a potential delay have any impact on mobile sports betting? Finally, how likely is it that mobile sports betting will be offered in New York for next year's Super Bowl, regardless if the state opts to take the legislative path or a budgetary path for legalizing online sports wagering? So,
can you repeat the first question? Because when you're reading I was like, okay, the first one sounds good, and then it went down.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here. So yeah, the first one is there more to be said on the high tax monopoly states, New Hampshire and Rhode Island, that have higher per capita revenue because they're surrounded by states that do not have legal wagering?
I just want to add a little piece to, go ahead, Bennett.
It really hasn't. What actually it shows, I mean, you could say that, New Hampshire should benefit because Massachusetts doesn't have doesn't have sports wagering, and Rhode Island should benefit because neither Connecticut nor Massachusetts have sports wagering. But what we've seen in those states really is very low handle. That handle is, you think people would be going there, the handle is low. It's basically a recognition that without promos, without incentives for players to bet, we've seen actually decent tax revenue, but still the betting numbers are lower than what you'd expect. The actual betting is smaller, and I think that's because if you have a system, a monopoly system that does not encourage competition between skins, and it's really hurt. It actually has hurt handle in those areas rather than helped.
Yeah,
And if I can add, if you want to look at Pennsylvania and what having all the different skins have done for the bricks and mortars, it has been helpful to have it spread out through the facilities themselves. And right now we are losing to Jersey anyway. And so we just need to get the online wagering in this state so we can increase revenue, increase jobs. And instead of having everyone go right up the border, there are certain parts, as everyone knows, of New York that are closer to Jersey than they are to where we are sitting right now. So we have to get that revenue in here, build the business.
Shouldn't the revenue from the Port Authority taking the make up for all that wagering? I mean, shouldn't the tolls for the George Washington Bridge make up for that? We should be doing well for Rick Cotton and the Port Authority.
Well, you can add that as part of the fees in the legislation,
Yeah.
Bennett.
I want to address the sort of the high, revenue question for states like New Hampshire and Rhode Island. Bennett referred to those states as actually having low revenue, but to put a fine point on the quandary that New York State is in, compare the numbers between Rhode Island and New York State. Rhode Island's handle or revenue, I'm sorry, Rhode Island's operator revenue is about, from the point of launch to today, 46.6 million. New York State's operator revenue is less than half that amount. So when you look at the smallest state in the country in terms of population size and landmass, doing twice the business of one of the largest states in the country, sort of the finance capital of the world, if you need any stronger argument for why New York State needs a mobile component, I don't know that you could draw a better illustration contrasting these two disparate situations in a state like Rhode Island that only has 2 casinos and one mobile operator, and it's taking New York to town to the tune of twice the amount of revenue, and I think more than twice the amount of state tax collections. And New York faces a potentially worsening situation in terms of nearby regional competition. I mean, New Jersey's mobile sports betting marketplace is fueled to the tune of about 20% of traffic coming from downstate New York. People who live in New York City that are going across the George Washington Bridge, taking the PATH train and placing a mobile wager the moment they cross that invisible barrier into New Jersey. Well, right now it's just really New Jersey and maybe to a lesser extent Pennsylvania, which is not a border on New York. But in less than 1 year,
a huge border on New York.
Yeah, Pennsylvania does border.
It's a huge.
It does. It does. Oh man, I looked at the wrong Google. I looked at the wrong Google map. But you have New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and then imminently Massachusetts, which borders a large swath of the New York State, border. Connecticut looks like it's on the verge of legalizing both retail and mobile sports betting. So that's at least.
I think where New York really would be hurt much more by Connecticut than by Massachusetts.
And how about Canada, which is also on the verge of legalizing single game sports wagering? So New York will be the hole in the middle of a donut, surrounded by states that offer a mobile component that make it really easy and convenient for New Yorkers that live within driving distance of those borders to take their business across state lines. This isn't just simply losing it to the offshore operators. This is basically gifting tax dollars to 4 or 5 nearby states. So this problem will worsen with the passage of time if New York is isolated as a non-mobile wagering state.
Okay.
Wait, can I add for the?
Let me just say, it's now 1 o'clock, but if the panelists are willing, we can continue on for a few minutes yet, so.
I just wanted to make a point for the Rhode Island. Didn't in the suit with they're looking, the governor's office is mirroring, partially Rhode Island's, proposal. Didn't they owe money for the Super Bowl with their one, platform?
But that could happen if the Giants ever won in New York. Or
Or the Bills.
Yeah, I'm not sure
That
though
was
that
bad
the New
for the
Hampshire
Senate.
model that other states have used it hasn't been successful in other states, so.
Yeah, I mean, the competitive bidding exclusivity model really only works, or I think only makes sense in states that don't really have, sort of a gaming, casino and horse race gaming infrastructure. New Hampshire doesn't have any casinos, doesn't have any racetracks that offer live in-person racing. The only gambling in New Hampshire prior to sports betting was operated exclusively by the state lottery. So making sports betting a subset of the New Hampshire State Lottery and offering exclusivity, I don't think that that's a valid comparator for New York State, given the way our gaming infrastructure exists, where you have a panoply of different stakeholders with competing interests. And what works for New Hampshire, what works for Rhode Island doesn't necessarily make sense in a state that has as many different players and gaming options as New York State.
Well, we also want to talk about, the jobs that this would bring to folks in the community. And yet that means the economic engine is going again. We don't want, I get there's a bottom line at the budget, but we also have their bottom lines in everybody's budget. And we want our employees back. We want to keep our employees. We want the businesses that have sprouted up because of us being economic engines to continue to thrive. Some have already closed because of last year. Last year was terrible on all levels. And so we don't want to further restrict the commercial casinos. We should be a part, we should be a part of online wagering. That is the bottom line. And it will be good not only for our team members, but the surrounding businesses and community, as well as revenue to the state.
Yeah, I'd like to put in a plug for the horse racing industry. I mean, New York's casino industry has only been in existence since 2013. You're only 7 years old. Horse racing in New York State is almost 100 years old. If my math is correct, 1981 years old. The legislative proposals advanced by Senator Addabbo and Assemblyman Pretlow provide a lifeline and a boost to
Dan, if people are only going to bet mobily, how's that going to help younger? How's that going to help Vernon Downs or Saratoga Harness people aren't going to go there to bet. They're going to make their bet on their iPad or on their phone.
A lot of it will be on mobile devices, but there's an important role.
90% of it. How are they going to compete? How are they going to compete against the OTBs, the old OTBs? And it was probably 20 in Nassau County. This is not going to be that great for the horse racing industry.
I think it will, and I'll explain why. Let me use the District of Columbia.
Yeah, can you do it quickly? Because I think we're going to have to wrap up.
In DC, you have in-person sports betting at the Capital One Arena where the Washington Wizards, Washington Capitals play. They're not, until recently, there are no fans at the games. Their handle for sports betting is better than was higher than the DC Lottery statewide app. And I think that kind of points to the incompetencies of the DC Lottery's operator and the way that they market it. But there's always going to be an important social component associated with sports wagering. People are going to want the experience. Not all of them.
If
There are
people
who are
work
gonna
for New York City
sports
OTB.
cars. There are people who are going to want to maybe go to the OTBs and have an additional amenity. People who might prefer to go to the casino environment and wager through a kiosk. And certainly the excitement of a sports betting lounge in Madison Square Garden, Yankee Stadium, and creating sort of the world's largest sports book. People could bet on their mobile devices, but there's just something irreplaceable about the social engagement, about watching sports together. This is not poker. This is the experience of professional sports, which is more communal than I would submit any other form of gambling could even approach.
And
Well,
I
I
will
think-
add to Daniel's comments.
Go
You know,
ahead. Go
the
ahead.
world
Shanna.
is changing. Everything's on your cell phone. So I think the horse, racing industry needs to, have, come up with some ideas. We're in our bill, we have kiosks that they can have at their facilities, maybe OTBs and, NYRA and them will start, coming up and branching out. The world can change, it's changing now. So maybe this is an opportunity for them to help them in different ways.
Okay, let me just say thank you to the panelists. I think all of us have really gained an understanding of while everybody's supporting this, what the differences are, and they are obviously significant. All with an attempt to resolve all of these by March 31st. So keep your eye on what's going on in Albany if you want to follow this. There'll be lots of activity. And let me just thank the panelists. I think this has been a terrific discussion. We appreciate your participation. And Ava, any last words?
No, just to echo your thanks to the panelists and to everybody who's been here. This has been great. Thanks so much, everyone.
Have a great day, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.